Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're glad that you've joined us today for this panel discussion on managing risk. My name is Luc Lariviere-Lacombe. My pronouns are he/him. I'm the owner of TheDungeonsKey, a small indie tabletop RPG publisher out of Montreal, Canada, and I'm also the current president of the Indie Game Developers Network, or the IGDN. So thank you for being here with us. Today, we're going to be talking about managing risk, specifically from the perspective of indie tabletop industry, the tabletop industry, and how we navigate the highs and lows of kind of raising funds and the types of financial and emotional risks that we take, right? And the strategies that we have to either reduce or to mitigate those risks. So with us, we've got several members of the IGN today. Without further ado, I'd like to maybe turn it over to Kimi. You can maybe give us a quick introduction, please.
Hi, I'm Kimi Hughes, she, her. I own and run Golden Lasso Games. I've done a number of Kickstarters, 2 successful ones for my company, which combined have raised around $90,000. And then I've been like a writer, like a stuff like that. You know, if we reach this level, Kimi Hughes will write in a thing. So I've been involved in a bunch of those. Also, and helping other people, just kind of like advising as a friend. I don't do it in a professional capacity, but my company runs on crowdfunded funds, so it's important.
Awesome.
Let's pass it to Jason.
Hi, I'm Jason Ward. I run and own AccidentalCyclops Games. We specialize in, I would say, indie tabletop games. We made the mistake of doing one 5e project. I say mistake joking. We've done a 5e project recently. I have done 3 crowdfunding campaigns totaling about 300,000, give or take. What else is important? That's about it. That's all. That's me.
Awesome.
Last but not least, but my name is Wonmin. It's pronounced like 1 minute, he, him. Owner, founder of Pegasus Games. I've created 2 tabletop games so far. One's a board game, and one's kind of like a board game RPG hybrid across 2 crowdfunded campaigns. But the second campaign failed once, and then I relaunched it a year later successfully, totaling around 18 plus 8, so $26,000. I've been in the industry for about 7 years now. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I mean, we've got a gamut of experience across the board. It sounds like, from tabletop RPGs to board game and manufacturing and kind of everything in between. So thank you to the 3 of you for being on here and answering some of these questions. So I think we can probably just kind of kick things off. I'd love to know a little more. This is a question to each of you, right? So you can kind of bounce ideas off of each other, or one person take it at a time. But when you launched your first crowdfunding campaign, what were some of the biggest fears or risks that you felt like you had, and at the time, right, in sort of your inexperience, how did you mitigate those?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Unless somebody wants to go ahead of me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I made I don't know if it was a critical error or just dumb luck. It was kind of a combination of the two. I decided to work with somebody else's IP for my first game. And the game is called The Real Thing, and it's based on the music of the band called Faith No More, if y'all are familiar with them. 90s era kind of grunge era band, and I got to meet the band through the process, and they gave us access to their IP to be able to make a game out of it, and we were brand new babies at this. So the biggest risk for me going into that about 5 years ago was being able to treat their IP in a way that was respectful to them and to their fans, and still be able to create the game we wanted to create using that IP with while kind of walking on eggshells a little bit. So that was one big risk. The other was, I would say, just working with friends. What can possibly go wrong working with some of your best friends on a project? And the answer is a lot could go wrong working with your friends on a project of that magnitude. So there was some risk inherent in deciding to work with some of my good buddies that we went all the way back to high school, big fans of the band, and decided to work on this together. But we came through it and learned some strategies through that I was able to apply to the next 2 campaigns. And I'd love to dive into some of those details once we hear some more for some others. Kimi, I pick you. Go.
Okay, great. You know what? I think I really benefited from ignorance in my first campaign. I had zero actual training. I'd gone to no workshops. I had a thing I really believed in, some Photoshop skills and a dream, and a bunch of people who were telling me, hey, this is really good. You should make it a thing. Because I'd made it for myself, because I was like the forever GM in my group. I do tabletop RPGs, and I got tired of like pulling things from a bunch of different games to like group source our campaign building. So I was like, I'll make a thing. So I did it myself for fun, and then people kept saying, can I have one? I'm like, well, it's just a Miss Cleo tarot deck with a bunch of labels on it. I guess so. And then eventually I did it. But I think that I wasn't nearly as stressed or scared or as just stressed out as I was after I learned about crowdfunding with my second campaign, just because I was like, oh, if it works, great. If it doesn't, okay, like no big deal. But then like but that was like what kind of also launched my company and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think if it had failed, like it would have been like, oh, okay, I guess not that many people wanted it. But now I have like a company and I'm trying to like balance things with new projects and things like that. So I think that just like the lightheartedness and the lack of expectation with that first project was kind of a gift, I think, that I will never, ever have again, if that makes sense.
Yes. That certainly does.
Before I go with my introduction, I think it might be helpful for the viewer if you guys maybe told when your first campaign launched, just so people, maybe viewers, can understand what the landscape might have been like back then. Yeah. So if Jason, you could go first. When was your first crowdfunded?
Sure thing. Yeah. We launched the first book of the Real Thing trilogy in 2022, early 2022, I believe. Okay. We've been working on it for a couple of years before that, and so we really hit it at the height of when crowdfunding was just skyrocketing, right? Like 2021, 2022 was peak time to launch an indie game on Kickstarter. So we benefited from that dumb luck as well.
My first campaign funded on March 5th, 2020.
Oh, wow.
Wow. That's like right before
No, literally like wow. 8 days before the world shut down. So yeah, I got to figure out, because again, it was my first thing. I had done cards, not realizing that cards were so much more difficult and had so many more laws about printing than books. I was like, okay, no dice is what I knew. And and then so yeah, I figured out worldwide, like manufacturing, worldwide shipping, all those things in the early. Then I guess by that that wasn't all done in the early days of the pandemic, but yeah, through the pandemic is how I taught myself how to make games. Wow. Don't do that. That's my first thing. Don't do that.
Right?
Yeah.
Wonmin, back to you.
Yeah. So my first crowd campaign was funded in 2021 March. So 1 year after you, Kimi. But the idea for that game, I had been working on it at the time for around 3 years, starting in 2018. And I think probably my biggest mistake was at the beginning, I didn't really have a clear goal. Just like Kimi, like I didn't have a lot of training. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I wanted to make this game. Like I had all this creative energy inside of me that I wanted to kind of like unleash out into the world. And I didn't like start this whole journey like wanting to make a ton of money. I didn't expect this to become like a bigger thing than just one game, right? So in the beginning, I just kind of made the mistake of making a very passion project game, not necessarily something that would sell well, but just something that was near and dear, close to my heart. And going back, I would probably do something for my first game. I would probably do something a lot more marketable. We can go more into detail after everyone's had a chance to talk more in depth about their games. But yeah,
sure. I mean, and that's a really mature thing, I think, to kind of point out too, kind of early on in this discussion, is that when we're talking about financial risks, right, or managing risk in crowdfunding, the emotional risk too, right, that we take, and again, falling into kind of this pit trap of trying to do something that isn't necessarily marketable, isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I think we could always start off with this idea that we want to maybe start with something that we are excited and passionate about, but as soon as we try to start looking at some of the more kind of business oriented oriented, mindset and trying to maybe do this for a living, etc. We actually, I think, at least from my personal experience, have to start making some compromises, in terms of what we prioritize, and then how we execute on that too, right? I think it's an interesting question, and we can maybe segue into some of kind of those thoughts. Are there any things that you would have done differently, looking back now? And I think you guys have mentioned a few, but kind of along those lines, lessons learned. Maybe there were some things that you underestimated, or maybe there were some things that you overestimated in terms of risks and how those may have impacted not necessarily just your first projects, but any of the projects that you've crowdfunded.
Sure. Mistakes going into the first one. Yeah, I had done very little in the way of understanding the industry. I hadn't done seminars or anything like that. I guess I shouldn't say I hadn't done any. I was at a few Gen Con seminars over the years, just out of curiosity more than anything else. And I hadn't yet.
Common theme.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I have so many good seminars there, right? And it's in my backyard. So yeah, I got my feet wet by jumping in with my entire body, as they say. And my biggest mistake was just not doing the research up front, not reaching out to professionals who'd been doing this for a long time. And I was able to make it through that first campaign basically on grit. I'm lucky I have a little bit of grit, I guess, and the time to put into it. My kids are old enough where I could sink more time into the project than I probably should have. And, I had good friends that I was working on it with that were willing to put the time in as well. But if I had it to do over again, I would join IGDN 2 years before starting my first game rather than a year after finishing my first game, I think, because the resources here are great. So many awesome people. And then just people knowing where to point you. Like, I never would have met our consolidator, which we were talking about before this call, had people at IGDN not pointed me in that direction and said they had a great experience with them. So there's always somebody you can rely on in the community, and it's a very open community. And I don't just mean IGDN, I mean the gaming community in general. By and large, people want to help, and the people that don't want to help don't last very long in the community because they're a little bit ostracized.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to that from their perspective.
I think the biggest thing is, like I got lucky with a lot of my crowdfunding campaign. By then I was already a super backer, so like I threw a lot of my money at different projects, so I knew what I liked on a Kickstarter page, and I knew what information I liked to see. So I feel like I had a little bit of an advantage with that as someone who'd been such a crowdfunding customer for so long. My biggest problem is I didn't really realize the lead up time that you're supposed to have for a campaign. And even this last time, knowing better, I still didn't do it far enough ahead of time. But I gave myself like 3 months of having like the waiting page up and like getting people to follow it. And it's like, you want as many people to be following that page before you go live as possible. So if you can like start ramping up stuff, like put the page up and start just like seeding it wherever you are, comms or whatever, like 6 months ahead, I feel like I would have, my last campaign went well, but I think it would have done even better if I'd spent that time seeding it a little bit more ahead of time. And I didn't spend any time for that first campaign. I had a lot of cool assets and stuff because I was like, oh, I like pretty campaign pages. I like ones that have cool videos. I knew that, but I didn't realize, I was like, okay, I'll put it up like this weekend. It'll be fine. And it's just like, okay. And I sort of like stumbled into success with it. But I think that was my biggest mistake with my first game.
And I guess to close it out, my biggest mistake with my first game was just going back to like the marketability of it. Like it ended up fine just because like Jason, I was able to just kind of power through it and just sweat blood and tears to market the game once it was out. But like building up to it, it would have been a lot easier had I done certain things. Like, for example, like the art for my game was really, really not good. Like it works with my game. Like just to give a quick background, my game was about like being a new hire at a cutthroat corporation. So it's very sort of dry, like almost like Office Space, The Office type of humor. And the art, I ended up going with like, what is the art style where it's like you see it on like landing pages all the time, like the flat, like illustrated characters with like a lot of color and just kind of like not much details. All that's art style. It really works like for a corporate game, but for just because it's well themed and like it works together doesn't necessarily mean it'll pop out at like anyone who happens to stumble upon the page or stumble upon my game. And it just really hurt my marketability, right? The thing I would bring my game to conventions, and then the number one thing I would hear would be like, is that, oh, this game is too real. Oh, this game is too close to home. Or like, I have enough of this game at work, right? Why would I buy this game? And like, it's just, that was the number one thing I heard. And every time it would just like stab me in the heart and be like, oh my God, like why, why did I make my game, my passion game so unmarketable, So if I went back, I would probably fix that.
Can I say something that I think that you did good though? Like, is that okay? Can we go off the script?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I think it's great that you tested it, that you were like out in the community with it for so long.
Right.
I think that's another mistake people make a lot. And like, I tend to over test my games. For Decima, I had been working on it and floating it around and playing it at different conventions and stuff for like 4 years before I kickstarted. And the same thing with my recent game that I kickstarted last summer. I'd been playtesting and running different versions of it for about 4 years as well. Because I feel that's really important to get kind of that grassroots word of mouth and also get like that feedback like you were getting. Like, and you find that kind of niche and you find that wording when people describe your game back to you, you need to really pay attention because that's where you get those key terms that you use like in your listing later, both on Amazon also, by the way, and on like your crowdfunding platform. If they say, oh, this is like real life but work, oh man, this is so much like work, but I get to be bad or whatever. It's like, okay, like suddenly you've got like a splash like slogan to put on something that might catch people's attention. So I feel like a lot of people get excited about their games, crowdfund them, and don't quite know their game fully yet. Like taking time to like understand the soul of your game and look for that like reflection of that soul in other people's eyes when they're playing with it. Like, it's very dramatic wording, I realize, but like, it really helps you create a crowdfunding campaign that speaks to people who really are interested in it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, packaging up kind of what everyone just said there, it really feels like risk number one is you didn't put in enough groundwork ahead of time, right? Like that is one of the biggest risks of going into a crowdfunding campaign is not putting in the legwork up front that's really required to be successful.
Definitely. And I just wanted to add one more thing. Like, so what ended up happening was after all the feedback from like conventions and from customers saying like, oh, that's too real, that's too close to home. So I created this tagline. Since it's a corporate game, and I wanted people to I wanted to evoke like something for people who are passing by and just kind of giving my game a glance. So the tagline I came up with was the closest you can get to stabbing your coworkers in the back. So I wanted to like kind of work with like the not hate, but like the dislike you might have for some of your coworkers. So I was able to kind of turn that feedback into like a marketing type thing. But, had I known that earlier, then I would have been able to use that for my crowdfunding campaign and maybe it would have been easier. I don't know. So yeah, definitely putting the legwork is a lot of help.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can absolutely relate. And just to kind of share a little bit of my story, I mean, I think to your point, Kimi, having a following up front, is super important. When I launched my first Kickstarter campaign, I think I gave it about a week. And I had about 56 followers and I thought I was doing good. So it just goes to show, and I funded, it just goes to show that we can still tackle these things, mitigate risk, even kind of do everything quote unquote wrong, and still be successful, right? If we have the kind of the passion or the drive for it, right? And so I think what we're highlighting more than anything is that you can always do it better, but that it shouldn't prevent anyone from giving it a try, right? In either case, right? But with that said, I think, and although we hadn't kind of discussed this kind of line of questioning ahead of the panel, I am curious to see whether or not either of you has taken on more incremental risk as you've learned more and more about the industry. I'll just kind of give you an example. In my experience, maybe I started off with just doing some PDFs, right? I was just doing some PDF fulfillment, and then my next campaign maybe I'm taking on some print-on-demand books, and then maybe I'm exploring a short print run, and then maybe an offset print run, right? My next campaign, right? Did you guys find yourself doing something similar, just because you were too anxious to dive head in first, or did you guys just go for those beautiful hardcovers, Smithsonian bound with the ribbons, the bookmarks? Of course, Wonmin, I'm not sure what the equivalent of that is on the board game side, but I'm sure you'll tell us. Kimmy, you're smiling. I'll turn it over to you. What did you sound like? You've got ribbons in every one of your books.
Yeah. Oh, I jumped. I jumped not even like straight into the pool, like like the high dive they use for the Olympics. Like I just jumped off of that with no planning. But I do give I do give a lot of advice. I do mentoring a lot in the industry now, and that's generally what I tell people who are like looking for advice. My first advice is don't start with crowdfunding your baby. Like your big passion project is the one you're going to want to work on first. Don't do that. If you have another little zine that you want to mess around with or something, like crowdfund that first to learn the process, to build up a little bit of a following and some people who like your company or your games. And then after you've done your like dress rehearsal, then do your big show and the thing that you're super passionate about. That is exactly the opposite of what I did. Like I said, I was like, oh yeah, no problem. So I did a full color tarot deck with individual pictures on each card, with like the Kickstarter version had like gold leaf on it, and the cards had gold ink, and like it was like the whole thing. And that was difficult and hard. I really love spreadsheets. So even though the COVID snuck up on me a little bit and changed prices a lot, like I still ended up barely in the black by the end of everything, which really is just luck, honestly. But that's my biggest thing is like, I think the incremental design and like we're talking about before, the big emotional risk is much less if you start with something you care about, but is not your darling. So that's my first recommendation. And it's the hardest thing, because when you have your baby, like your beautiful project, the thing you're passionate about, you want to work on it all the time, being like, I'm going to put this on the shelf and bring out this redheaded stepchild. Sorry, redheads. I really like that. But like, this is the one I'm going to put my effort into right now, is really, really hard and difficult. But it is, I think, very important.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. I did not do my baby up front, but I did go all out for it. We did, multiple versions of the book. We did decks of cards to go with it. We did dice. We did T-shirts, because we had this IP we were working with. So we went really, really heavy into this first campaign. But I still have 2 babies sitting on the shelf that I have not launched. Because I'm afraid to do them. I'm afraid I'm not going to do them justice, right? It's like it's almost like it's a little bit like parenting in that way, where you're always afraid you're going to mess your children up, and then you realize, oh man, kids are basically made of rubber. It takes a lot. We all went through our own kind of trauma growing up, and we turned out all right, and I think these games are kind of the same thing too. Like, you're going to make mistakes along the way, and sometimes you have to just take that big leap. But I agree with Kimmy that big leap probably should not be your passion project right out of the gate. Get your feet wet with a PDF project. And Jean-Luc, I wish I would have had, again, one more piece of advice I wish I would have had a long time ago is take baby steps. Do just a PDF game to start, then do maybe just a print on demand, and then jump into the offset printing.
I totally agree.
After my first game, I just talked about how like I wished it was more marketable and I wanted it to be prettier and have nicer art, right? So for my second game, I decided to lean very, very heavily towards that. So I wanted to go all out. Like I wanted character pins, I wanted stickers, I wanted T-shirts, hats, merchandise, everything, right? So I think what happened was I bit off a lot more than I could chew. Basically, I focused too much on like the peripherals rather than actually on the core of the game, right? Making the game fun. Like I knew it was fun, but like it wasn't necessarily like widespread fun. It was very niche fun. and I think that hurt the campaign a lot. So for when I launched my second game for the first time, I didn't necessarily get the traction or the momentum that I was looking for. So I put with huge heavy heart, like it was probably the worst, lowest I've ever been emotionally, like in my adult life, right? I had to cancel the campaign that I've worked maybe 2+ years on. And like looking back on it, like I think it was just like I said, I bit off more than I could chew. I didn't focus enough on what made the game fun. Why is it fun? Like why would people want to play it? And instead, I just focused too much on the marketability, right? I focused on the characters. I focused on cute little pins and like little paraphernalia that doesn't really matter, right? And I think, and then like on the second time around with my second game, like relaunching it next year, I was able to, kind of learn from those mistakes and just have those types of things be like a stretch goal. Like, and if people are invested, then it will get there. So what ended up happening was I ditched all of the merchandise, all of the T-shirts, all the apparel, the hats, and all of unnecessary things, and just like put all my efforts and focus back into playtesting and making the game really fun and like really attractive for, people of all types of gaming backgrounds, and it ended up working because I was able to successfully fund the campaign the second time around.
Mm-hmm.
That's honestly like the thing that drowns the most campaigns is all the extra stuff. And and someone gave me really good advice when I was setting up my first one, and it was also my preference since I backed so many games. Like I had so many sets of dice and things like that I never really used. Like someone told me, okay, any rewards you have them tie back into how you play the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like having pins and stuff, all of that just adds up money. And the thing you don't really think about when you're like, oh, I can do this, no problem, I'll just pack it all in my garage, is like, okay, suddenly it's like, okay, if it's just a book, I can use media mail. It's a lot cheaper. But if you've got dice, or if you've got, cards, or if you've got pins, or if you've got T-shirts, these are all things that have to be packed separately and start adding to, one, the processing time, whether you're doing it yourself or paying someone else to package your stuff, and then the costs of the shipping, whoever you're, sending it to, different tariff costs, tariff costs, we don't have to go into that. But even prior to the wildness that is this last few months, like the tariff costs are drastically different if you're doing a book or printed material versus like a shirt or merchandise like that. So all of that is, be very wary, especially your first campaign. Mitigating risk, keep the rewards simple and tied into actually how you play your game, and make as many of them digital as possible.
Yep.
Yeah. I love that advice. I think there's a lot of good things can come from add-ons too, right? You could maybe generate upwards of say 20% more funding through add-ons alone, right? But to your point, right? You've got to be mindful of some of the risks that you're taking up front, especially if it's T-shirts and other sort of paraphernalia. I think that you've summed it up really, really nicely, Kimi. You do touch on a few other things though, and I'd love to maybe hear from either Jason or Wonmin. Specifically about some of, again, we were talking about some of the adjacent risks, right? Whether it's in manufacturing, but it could also be in say through fulfillment, with something like backer kit and kind of marketing, advertising, and other kind of areas. Although I'm trying to appeal to kind of some of the smaller folks that might be listening, but also some of the larger folks. Maybe Jason or Wonmin, did you guys run into any concerns around maybe concerns around advertising, distribution, fulfillment, and if you did, you've obviously had some success. So what were some of the steps that maybe you took to help to reduce some of that risk with regards to your previous campaigns? Yeah, Jason.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is all side gig for me. So I've got a whole another career in dealing with spreadsheets and working with sourcing talent and all this sort of stuff that has served me pretty well in this industry. But it really is its own beast. There's a lot of stuff, you talked about tariffs and fulfillment and shipping and things I'd never had to deal with before. And Kimi mentioned a little bit ago spreadsheets. Man, I love a good spreadsheet. I will tell you that we live and die by our budgeting spreadsheets. We start making them 6 months or more before we run a campaign. We get all of those numbers in there really tight before we do that Kickstarter or that backer kit or whatever platform we're using. and we know where we're going to land, and we build in enough margin so that when we hit our goal, we can pay for the game. When we hit our real goal, which is usually much higher than that campaign goal, hopefully we're making a little bit of money, right? That's kind of how we're planning things. But you have to build in, you have to plan, you have to build in those numbers so that when tariffs do show up, there is some money in the bank that can absorb some of that tariff cost. And when you find out that you have to hire an extra artist you weren't planning on, you can, you have a little bit of bandwidth in there budget wise so that you can make that happen. So it really comes down to planning, and I would be happy to share any of my magic spreadsheets, and maybe others will as well.
So, I mean, in terms of like side goods and paraphernalia, I think, like I said, Kimi made a great point. Like, if you could tie it back to the game, then that's great. So what I did was that for my second campaign, I just made everything basically a stretch goal. And every $1,000, I would create a new pin for a new character. And it worked because my game had 25 characters, so I would be able to go all the way as high as 25K, if that were to happen, which would be amazing. But, it didn't go that far, but that's okay because now, I was able to get 1 or 2 pins out of it, and then everyone who backed it, received those pins, and it didn't add too much to the overhead, so it wasn't too bad. Way less than the first time I tried to run it with like hats and t-shirts and all that. So definitely try to keep the scope a lot smaller, especially if you're like new or if it's your first campaign. Just definitely focus on the game first.
So I want to kind of jump into some of the questions that I had around setting funding goals. Kimi, Jason, both of you have talked about spreadsheeting, and maybe we use that as a kind of a large opportunity to talk about budgeting. But I think one of the first things I think you wanna do is to start thinking about a funding goal and what that looks like. So maybe Kimi, could you kind of walk us through how you go ahead and set your funding goals, and maybe how that may have changed over time, right, from your first to where you are now?
Yes. So anything you're going to have to pay money for should go in the spreadsheet. And like that includes things that you may not think about. So do some research. I mean, like layout, art. A lot of people think about art right away. They don't necessarily think about like copy editing and how much that costs and get things like that. They don't think about if you're going to pay for any advertising on social media or like Facebook ads or whatever you're going to do, or if you're going to pay an influencer. You should have all those things up front. If you're printing physical items, do that. All of that should go in your spreadsheets. And you should get multiple quotes for the things that you get quotes for. And tell the people you're getting quotes from about your other quotes so they beat that price. So like generally, if I'm getting things like manufactured, actually printed, I get at least 3 quotes. And then I put them all in my spreadsheet. And then I generally put my funding goal for the highest one. And that way, and then I use the lowest one, or the one that I think is the lowest, but also good, because that gives me some wiggle room. And people, I still don't know what happened to the first printer I was going to use for my card game Decima. I had gotten physical, like samples. He'd made the whole thing. He'd sent it to me. They were great. I sent the email back. Hey, super great. These look great. Let's go for it. Like after working with him for months, and I just never heard back.
Wow.
Like, I don't know what happens. Like, I don't know. And like, I hope he's okay. Like, so like I ended up at one point with, okay, we're back to 0 friends. All right, because like no matter which factory you use, they generally have different templates and stuff. Right. So I had everything laid out and everything for that particular factory on their templates. So then I had to go back and do it all again. So it was a great thing that I had a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. So always have those things, and that way you do have that wiggle room. And you also want to make sure that you're planning whether you're going to include shipping costs in the crowdfunding, which I suggest you don't. After making that mistake on my first Kickstarter and then having the world go into a pandemic and shipping get much more expensive than what I'd priced out. So always save the shipping costs, including tariff costs and everything else, for after, when you're actually ready to ship your product, whatever it is. So make sure everybody knows that too.
Yes, be very clear about that in your campaign. Yeah, Kimi, you hit everything that I was going to say. So that was fantastic. Yeah, I think The only thing I would add to that is don't pay for something that your backers will pay for you ever. We have to realize that what we are selling here is a lifestyle decision. It is not something somebody needs. So you have needs. Make sure you're taking care of the needs of your company and your campaign and yourself with the cost that you're putting out there. So if you can get it, not if you can, you should always get them to pay for shipping and tariffs and other things that you are doing for them on their behalf so that they can get the product they have ordered from you. So yeah, I would say that's the only thing I have to add is make sure that you're being mindful of the fact that people are buying this because they want it, not because they need it, and they will pay for that.
I guess the only thing I have two things to add, actually. The first thing is make sure you're in like a good financial, like stable place before you do this, because this can be a very financially risky or just tumultuous period of time, I guess, both emotionally and financially. Make sure you're stable in both of those regards before you do this, because learn from my mistake. The first campaign I ran, that was basically my full-time job, because I just had savings built up and I wanted to try tackling this with 100% of my effort and see where it led me. But that got me in the trouble of do I pay for this influencer or do I pay for rent? It was just kind of like that kind of trade-off that happened in my mind, and it was just very, very stressful, and I would not wish it on my worst enemy.
Yep.
So on my second campaign, I got another different job, a full-time job, and this turned into a side gig. So that was a lot more relieving, a lot less stressful, because I was able to, kind of take the money I earned from my full-time job and was kind of funneling it into traveling for conventions or paying for advertisement, paying influencers, whatever. So it was way less stressful, and that was super helpful, I think. And then finally, just not necessarily budgeting, but when you run your first campaign, I think everyone has this special one-time buff or one-time power-up where you get it's called the friends and family power-up, where you tell all your friends and family about this cool new campaign on Kickstarter that you're running, and then they're they might not even be interested in games, your aunt and uncle or whatever, but they're oh, little cousin Wonmin is launching a cute little game on Kickstarter, let me donate $10, $20 or whatever, right? So your very first campaign, you're going to have this quick, cute little buff that's going to give you maybe, I don't know, 10%, 5% or whatever of your funding goal. But don't count on that for your second game, because they're not going to donate twice.
Yeah, and it's true, and I totally agree. And I'll say I certainly appreciate that you're kind of bearing your heart out, right? A little bit here, Wonmin. When it comes to talking about these crowdfunding campaigns, because I can see how much it obviously meant to you and how much it still means to you, right? And that we kind of think back on these things, and it can still kind of sting a little bit, but it just kind of highlights that a lot of the preparation we put and going into these things can also be to mitigate some of these sort of emotional risks that we're taking, right? Because anytime you start mixing, whether it's friendship and business or passion and business, we put ourselves at risks because we're kind of putting ourselves out there. I'd love to maybe hear from either Kimi or Jason too about some of those kinds of similar experiences, if you felt like you've had any. Did you ever feel at one point emotionally, you were on the hook for something, and that perhaps it was too difficult, or a time where perhaps you made a decision that you regretted, and how did you get out of that?
All the time, every day. I think we all suffer from that imposter syndrome of all right, I did the thing, and you ride this high of all right, funded, and then it's Kickstarters are the I always do the month-long ones. They are so stressful. I don't remember the last crowdfunding month. I did it smartly. I did it I'm a teacher, so this last time I was smart enough to do it in the summer, which was helpful. But then I just sat there all day, and it's this emotional roller coaster of you refreshing this page and then pretending you have other stuff in your life and going and doing it with your phone as you refresh the page. And and then you do it, and things. It's this I don't know. It's the equivalent of like social media, people liking you, and it's like this validation. And if you feel like it's this personal judgment on you, how well your Kickstarter does, and whether you're, creative and art, your art is worth it to people. And it is a emotional and mental just like roller coaster. And you need to be in a good place, because I came and like even when it succeeds, suddenly then you have this massive thing you have to do, and like you have to balance it with your real life, and it's really hard. It's a scary thing, and you're worried that you're going to let people down. And yeah, I don't know. I'm a little less than a year from my last crowdfunding campaign. I'm still working on the project, still updating all those things. And there's days where I sit and cry going, I'm messing this up. No one's going to like it. And I'm making it kind of funny right now, but it's absolutely not. Like, I'm like terrified. I'm absolutely terrified that these people have backed this thing, and I'm going to give it to them, and they're going to be like, oh, this is so awful and disappointing. And you're just like, oh God, please don't be disappointed. I really put a lot into this. Yeah. So it's a huge risk. It's scary.
Yeah. All of that for sure. The one thing that I did not think would hit me as hard as it has is the fact that the number of people actually playing the games they've bought from me is staggeringly low. And I don't know why I didn't think of that, because I have shelves of games I've read but never played, just shelves of them. And that's where my game is falling in, because my first game is falling in because it's an indie game that had a niche audience that really loved the idea, and it just never makes it to the table for 70 or 80 or even maybe 90% of them. And so hearing reports back, I'm hearing reports back from the same 20, 30, 40 people all the time, and I'm like, cool, I know what you think of my game. I would love to know what some new people think of my game. So that was an emotional, you're on the emotional roller coaster during the campaign and even during the production of the book, but then at the end you're like, man, now I really want to know what people think of the game. And you're like, well, just like all those games you have, no one is playing them. So that was a bummer for me. The other thing is I'm about a year out from our biggest campaign, which is the 5e1 I mentioned briefly earlier. And first off, man, that is a whole different kind of situation getting into the 5e space, because you're diving into a pool that is unbelievably large. And I grew up on Dungeons and Dragons in the late 80s into the early 90s, showing my age there. I played AD&D. That's what I started on, people. So I'm going back. But I hadn't touched Dungeons and Dragons for about 20 years. And then I got back into it with some friends, and we happened into this artist that had this whole catalog of creature art. And I was like, how is this not in a game already? And so we talked with her, and long story short, we ended up making a setting piece based on this artist's work. And I have never been more stressed in my life than I am on this project, that I am finding that I'm going to do most of the work for, even though we hired other people to do the work. It's still mostly falling on me somehow, even though I'm paying people. And so I guess the word of wisdom from that is, you will miss things when you're planning your campaign and when you're planning your project. Everything you miss is now your responsibility. Yep. No one else can be put on the hook for what you failed to see ahead. So be wary of that. There's going to be additional work, and there's going to be people that flake out on you, or life hits them and they can't help you anymore. That's on you.
Yeah, and that's so true, and also some of the kind of points you all made about the pitfalls of turning to your own projects for validation, right? That's a big one, right? Because I know I've been guilty of looking at my phone and refreshing the page when a project is live, and whether or not we've hit our funding goal or the next stretch goal or the next backer, and it can get even worse if you're, say, working with advertising, right? Whether it's through Meta or Instagram, and looking at those numbers too, right? So just being wary of, yes, it's super important to, to kind of, cross the T's, dot the I's, and do your work from a budgetary perspective, an execution perspective, but also be kind to yourselves too, right? About the way that you organize and operate on these things. yeah, I just kind of want to add that. But I think there's kind of a unique opportunity to talk too about, and although it's moving away from this idea of the sort of the emotional risks, but I think one of the things we could probably all do to mitigate some form of risk. In this case, it's so much financial, but maybe it's about the amount of work we put up front in a project before launching it. Right? I know personally, I like to have the book written and laid out for the most part before going to crowdfunding.
Wow.
But I'm fortunate enough to have kind of a full-time job. Of course, I'm not doing this full time. I'm not paying myself, right? And so I can take the time to kind of quote unquote do it right. But there's no really kind of right or wrong way to do this. But so how much of the work are you guys doing up front for your projects before you go to campaign? Is that 50%, 70%? Is the book laid out? Do you have all the art? What does that look like for you guys? Maybe Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. It's varied. I've had 3 campaigns. It's varied on those campaigns. The first one we had probably 50% of it done. And I think it was the heaviest 50%. It was mastering the system we were using because we customized Powered by the Apocalypse. And so we did some testing and things for that took a good amount of time and wrote up all the rules, and we had all of that stuff ready to go. But man, we certainly weren't into layout yet, and we only had probably 30% of the art done. So I'm going to guess we were around 50%. Our most recent campaign, the Surviving Strange Hollow for 5e, that was probably closer to the 60 or 70% level. And that's partially because we were using somebody else's catalog of art.
Right.
We had 95% of the art done, a good amount of the rules written because, again, we were playtesting them and messing around with them and getting them developed by some folks that knew what they were doing. Yeah, it was in that 60 to 70% range.
Nice.
I would not recommend going to crowdfunding with less than 50% ready, though. You need those assets, first off, to talk about the game in an intelligent way, because you can't tell people about something you haven't made yet. At least you can't tell them the truth about something you haven't made yet. Secondly, man, you want those visual assets. People are drawn to the beauty of it, or maybe beauty is the wrong word, but whatever the unique style, the visual style is. So
the art direction,
yeah, the art direction for sure. So you want to have as much of that stuff as you possibly can so that you can make people attracted to the game. And then once they're pulled in by the visuals, they can understand what you're doing because you've actually written a good chunk of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know, Wonmin, you talked about, focusing a lot on the art style in your games. How would you contrast the amount of effort that you put into your work and where you were even just visually before being able to move forward?
So for my first game, it was a board game, traditional board game. I pretty sure I was 100% ready. Like I had all the way until the manufacturer templates, everything was ready before I launched the campaign. And then for my second game, I had all of the assets. The only thing I didn't have was the templates and the manufacturer ready print files. So I would say 90% there, 95 maybe even. So I think, unfortunately, in the board game space, I've never written an RPG or a book, so I'm not sure how that's done. But I think in the board game space, most campaigns tend to be close to the 90, 100% done before going to Kickstarter. I think Kickstarter is basically turning into a glorified pre-order page almost.
Yep.
And that's just, I don't know, that's just the nature of our industry now. I think gone are the days where Kickstarter is where you go with a cool idea and then you just raise the money for it, right? I think nowadays you basically need to have the finished product and just kind of sell people on the product. I don't know. I guess those are the golden days of Kickstarter that I've never really experienced. So I don't know.
Did anyone ever really experience them? I mean, maybe. But yeah, no, I agree. And Kimi, how about you? What do you go to crowdfunding with?
I usually go to crowdfunding. The game has to be all the mechanics have to be done. I've play tested it. It's at a place where it's locked, basically. I might rephrase things a little bit. Once I get into when I have I did a PBTA game, how I word a move on the move sheet might slightly change, but the move is set. That's how it stays. I usually pay for way too much art way too early because I'm also very inspired by art. Yep. So generally, very early in the process, I'll find my artist. I want all the team locked in with contracts. definitely before we go. So I'll have my artist, I'll have my layout artist, I'll have my editors and proofreaders all locked in. I do a lot of the writing stuff myself, but if I'm working with another writer, I also have them locked in. If I'm having people write adventures as stretch goals or whatever, all of that, I think it's really important, at least especially for RPGs. I think people want like a quick start or something to play. So I want to have something like that ready to go. It's definitely not going to be the full game. I make that super clear in there, because if you give them the whole game, they're not going to come back later and pay for it. So make sure you're like, hey, this cool thing that seems like there's a big hole in the game right here. That's because there's a big hole in the game. You have to pay for the game to get it. Yeah. So like make sure there's like enough to like bring them back to actually pay for it. So I go with all of that ready. And that generally means also like the layout style is set, because I want the quick start to look and similar to the art and stuff, and the typeface and all those things that the final game will have as well. So I don't know what percentage that is, but that's a lot of percentage. Wow. It doesn't feel like a lot of percentage once you get done and you're like, oh, I have to write 200 pages of a book now. Cool. Like, I mean, I had a lot of it written. Like when I put the quick start in there, it's like, almost 100 pages anyway. So whatever. But so yeah, you want it all done and definitely locked in with contracts, and it helps too. It helps legitimize your Kickstarter or your crowdfunding. I'm sorry, you not use Kickstarter. I've always used Kickstarter, right. So I keep saying that, but crowdfunding, because people can see, okay, they've got a layout artist already. This is the art they're going to use. Like you were saying, Jason, like that visual component's really important, but also people who know what they're looking at want to see that you have a full team locked in. And they want to know, like I made a big point of like, hey, I have a first draft of the game written. It doesn't have all the cool fancy stuff in it yet, but it's like a first draft done. People want to see that. They want to know that you've been playtesting it. With board games, it's a little harder. It's like, they want to know you've been playtesting it and running it at cons and people like it and stuff like that. They want to see renders of all the components, stuff like that. So just whatever you can do to make them believe that you are as far along as possible to build confidence in you actually being able to finish it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even if it's a little bit smoke and mirrors sometimes.
Yeah, no, that's true. Are there any areas that you folks feel like you might compromise on? Like if there was one area out of the games you work on or the products you or the campaigns that you work on where you might say either have it as a stretch goal or not have it done. Whether it's art or copy editing, you name it. Like, are there any areas that you work on that you might say, hey, you know what? If I don't get this, it's not as big as a deal as some of the core art, for instance. I don't know, Wonmin, are there any things that like that? I know you primarily said that you're going in, say, with 100% completion, but if you had to kind of pull back a little bit, to kind of try to squeeze as much out of every dollar or out of your time, what kind of areas would you focus on?
Yeah, so board games actually have advantage if you think about it a certain way, because we have a lot of components, so you could skimp out on those things, right? Yep. You could use cardboard instead of wood, you could use plastic instead of metal or whatever, right? Like you can skimp out on a lot of things, but the inverse is also true, right? If you have a bunch of stretch goals or like you raise a lot more money than expected, then you could just increase the quality of all of your components, like across the board, right? For all of your games, you can make it like much thicker paper, much nicer paper. You can use gold foil or whatever, like different types of printing to just make the final product that much more, premium feeling. So that's, I think, one lucky thing that board games have, in contrast to RPGs, I guess. I don't really know, honestly.
Yeah, no,
we have experts here to tell us.
I love that. I think that's it's something that I wasn't even thinking that far, and that's why I'm so thrilled to have you here to be able to offer us that insight. Again, as far as the IGDN is concerned, right? We're designers for tabletop games, not just tabletop RPGs, and so yeah, that's awesome. Kimi, thoughts on areas where you might, like we say, skimp, right? But maybe pull back, right? Whether it's the thickness of the paper, as Wonmin says, or are you giving up on that ribbon? Would you ever consider taking the ribbon out of the book? You tell me.
Generally, that stuff's again, like I literally had, like, people give me shirts about how much I love spreadsheets. Like I've got like 4 spreadsheet queen shirts,
I love it.
just because it's such a thing. But like I have that all broken down ahead of time. So, and
Yeah.
and like when I was saying, like that is either built into my stretch goals. Like, so it's like, I know my base model is going to be this no matter what.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to have to take anything away from it. I might be able to add to it, just like you were saying, but like, okay, I may not have that ribbon bookmark until we hit, $40,000, dollars or whatever it is. But once we get that, it's there. Like it's there. I'm not going to take anything away. So I might start with a little thinner paper. I love having all color books.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to have super high quality. The thing I would generally skimp on would be like adventures and things like that. That would
Okay.
be added
Content.
later.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a lot of times, like I'll have the base game, and then generally adventures are a separate thing that people, again, like I have making digital rewards. Like the adventures are generally just digital. People can print them out if they want to, but they're separate. So that would be a thing that maybe I would have as a stretch goal at a certain point. But I find it's best to start very simple with something you absolutely 100% know you can produce, and then upgrade from there. And also not giving options also saves a lot of money and simplicity. If you have, okay, at this level, everybody's going to a hardback or whatever it is, it's much easier than if you're like, okay, we've got hardbacks and we've got soft covers,
right?
Because that makes it super complicated when you're ordering from factories and stuff. So
Yep.
yeah,
Couldn't
just
agree
start with
more.
the base model and upgrade. Kind of like if you have like old cars or something, start with like the Granny Mobile and then eventually add the Hemi later, like all that.
That's right.
And Jason, you must you got to look like you've got an ace up your sleeve, a secret piece of advice for our listeners that will save them tens of thousands if they just listen to this one trick. What is it? I want to know.
I wish that was true. No, I will say, so I'm thinking about this like skimping in 2 different ways. Like I'll skimp on the campaign to some extent. When I say skimp, I mean I will not spend money on things until I have the money from the campaign that I'm running sometimes. So, again, this is a second job for me. It is a job, by the way. Everyone has to realize this is a job. You may love it, but it's a job. And so I'll use some money out of pocket to do the things that I have to do, pay for some advertising or whatever to get the campaign up and running and some of that initial art. But I'm not going to buy more art than I need for the campaign ahead of the campaign, because that's risk, right? We're talking about managing risk here. If that campaign doesn't fund and I have to put it on hold for a year or two, like Wonmin did, well, that's that much longer that I'm carrying that burden, that financial burden for what is essentially a hobby job that I have. And, I have a wife and kids, so I try to mitigate that risk as much as I can. So I think if you're going to skimp on anything, be planning your campaign far enough in advance that you need exactly these pieces of art and this amount of written content, and you have a specific budget for advertising. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term. As listeners, I know my team here is, but as listeners, the term ROAS or ROAS, return on ad spend. Yep. Don't spend more money on advertising unless your ROAS is very, very good, because you're just throwing more good things into the wood chipper and not getting anything out of it. So, if you're going to skimp somewhere, set those budgets, stick to them, only produce what you need for the campaign before the campaign money comes to your account, and then start spending money that other people gave you for the product you're making.
Yeah.
So that was one way I was thinking about the question. The second one is, if you're producing books, which is primarily what Kimi and I are producing, there's some other stuff that goes along with it, but it's primarily books. It comes down to paper quality. It comes down to how many colors you're going to have in the book and what sort of little add-ons you're going to have. Are you going to have foil on the cover, things like that? And I agree with Kimi 100%. Plan for the base model. And just add those little knick-knacky things on as you go through the campaign. And you're like, hey, we made 20 grand more than we thought we were going to. These books are going to be amazing. We're adding gold foil and we're putting 3 ribbons in instead of 1 and all kinds of great stuff.
I love it. Heck yeah.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Kim.
Sorry. It also helps if you make those things Kickstarter exclusives.
That's true too. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like,
Nice.
Okay, we're ordering this many. I did that with Decima. Like the Kickstarter backers got like the gold the gold decks that have like the gold leafing. You got one. Jason's got one. Well, thank you. But like the ones I sell in the stores now, they have the exact same art, but just with like bright yellow, like a goldenrod color printed, not the shiny gold foil. So people have the fear of missing out, FOMO, and they like things like that. So if they're earning it with their increased thing, make sure if you're ordering retail copies later, which is a whole other panel, a different panel, then make sure that there's some differences and maybe don't quite go all out there, because that will also retail price them out of the price most retailers will want to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Well, I think, folks, we're coming to the end of our panel. I mentioned I wanted to ask you one last question, and that was whether, I mean, we've given so many invaluable pieces of advice, but if there was one of those pieces of advice, either that you've already mentioned or that you think would fit as the one thing that any new designer coming into the space looking to crowdfund their first project would follow, what do you guys think that would be? I don't know, maybe either Jason, maybe we'll hear from you again, and we'll go back to Wonmin, and then maybe Kenny, you wrap it off for us.
Sure. Yeah, I have heard from a lot of people, even inside IGDN, that they're not in it for the money, and it's a passion for them. It's a love. I understand that mindset. I don't agree with it. I think if you've decided you're making games and you're going to crowdfunding, if it's not about the money, you probably are putting yourself at a higher risk than you need to be. You need to be able to pay for the game that you're producing and not have it hurt your life in some way. So it can be a passion project. You can love what you're doing, but make sure that your numbers are tight and you're not putting yourself at any kind of personal financial risk over this stuff. Because if it's just for the love of it, play somebody else's games or just homebrew your stuff and play it with friends, because that's fun too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
And to add on to that, I think you should probably be in like a stable part of your life. Like, don't do this like after a life-changing event. Don't do this before surgery. Don't do this before breaking up with someone or getting married, or don't, like, try to be stable as possible, because it is very like emotionally, stressful, the whole process. So make sure you're at a stable point in your life where you can do this, right? And make sure it doesn't hurt you financially, as Jason said, or emotionally, like any variables that might change like during the process of you designing the game, going to Kickstarter or crowdfunding. Make sure that everything is, for the foreseeable future, going to be stable.
Yeah, I think my wife would agree with you, 100%. Kimi, I'd love to turn it over to you to kind of wrap things up, and then I'll close it out.
I think just be super, super transparent with your backers. They are investing emotionally and financially to much less extent than you are, but they want to see your thing come to life, whatever it is, and they deserve your honesty. When you run into troubles, just tell them. Like I do like radical honesty with my backers for my campaigns, and it's like, hey, look at this, the world is ending. Great. Okay, I'm going to do my best with this. Probably going to miss the deadline, but I'm going to keep you informed. So I make sure I'm doing at least monthly updates, even if there's not a lot to update. I've been like a background campaigns that are very clearly hiding things, and it stresses me out. Yeah. Like if things are going like we all kind of expected as backers, like we're all new at this. We're kind of figuring this out. A lot of people don't really do this professionally, things like that. Weird things happen, pandemics, tariffs, whatever. I had a baby during my first campaign. That was planned. I knew that, but
it was in the
honestly,
spreadsheet,
it was in the it wasn't the spreadsheet. And it was a whole 3 weeks after we funded. It was fine. Also in the pandemic, but and I mean, like I posted baby pictures. This is Golden Lasso baby. Okay. All those things, like just being honest with them, because that shows them the respect, and that makes them very loyal. And I have found that people return to projects, even if they fund late, even if they run into problems, because they appreciate the creators and know that the creators are working hard and doing their best and doing their projects in good faith. Mm-hmm. And that's a really, really important component of crowdfunding. So just make sure, don't hide things from your backers, be honest with them, be a little self-deprecating, they really love that.
Yeah.
Be true to yourself when you're having those communications too.
Yeah.
It's transparency, but it's also pure honesty, authenticity.
Absolutely. Yeah, the authenticity piece, like so many small creators try and make themselves seem like big creators, which is really ironic because if you talk to anyone who does crowdfunding or marketing for big game companies, they are trying so hard to seem small and authentic and like indie creators.
Yeah.
It's like, just use that. Be like, hey, my kid had the flu this week, or, my car broke down, so I haven't been able to do this, or whatever it is. Like, people will see you as a person, and it will make them more likely to care about you and cheer you on as you're succeeding, and forgive the problems than if you are a corporate type, very formal sounding update every month. And just like figure out your kind of like brand vibe and just go with it. And it should be something that you are like, your people should be able to read your posts in your voice if they know what you sound like.
Just make it sound like the version of you like best.
Yeah, like a little bit more professional, but like how you talk to like work friends.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Well, I can't thank you enough for having jumped onto this panel talking about managing risks, the financial, emotional risks of crowdfunding. So thank you again for being on. I'd love to give you the opportunity to maybe just plug again one last time who you are, if you've got any socials you want to throw out there before we drop. So Jason, over to you. How can people find out more about Jason Ward?
Yeah, I try to stay an enigma personally, but you can find AccidentalCyclops on BlueSky and Facebook, probably some other places I'm not thinking of right now, but look up AccidentalCyclops. It's pretty easy to remember and find. We've got a project that we funded about a year ago. We're doing a follow-on campaign with GameFound. It's called Surviving Strange Hollow. Look for that sometime in July or August.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us.
Kimi.
Hello, I'm Kimi Hughes. You can find me at Golden Lasso Girl, a lot of places on the internet. I'm off and on with different social medias. If you want to find my game company, it's Golden Lasso Games. And you can find that at goldenlassogames.com or at Golden Lasso Games on other things. We're not really on Twitter anymore, so I will never call it the other thing. But if you're also interested in hearing me talk more about different things, I also own and run the Happy Jacks RPG podcast network. So we do 2 or 3 streamed actual plays a week of indie games. Usually we don't really play the Dragon game. And then I also do a weekly advice show where people write in questions about tabletop RPGs from around the world. And I give them advice. It might be bad, it might be good, but it's usually fun. So you can find that at happyjacks.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome. Thank you. And Wonmin.
Yeah, so Wonmin Lee, founder of Pegasus Games. You can find my company website at unicornwithwings.com. Otherwise, I think I'm sold out of my first game. So I have maybe like 10 left. I don't know, not many. So I'm only plugging my second game. You can find it at lovecareermagic.com. That's pretty much it.
That's awesome. Well,
go
ahead.
No, sorry, that was it.
No worries. Okay, well, this was a summer series panel from the IGDN on managing risk. Thank you again. You can find out more about our organization at the IGDNonline.com. We're obviously open to all sorts of members and joining us. Thank you again, folks. We'll call it there, and we'll hope you guys enjoyed. Bye, everyone.